I, Tim, am putting myself on a book buying ban. Until I finish my physical to-be-read pile, I'm not allowed to buy any more books. As you can see behind me, the bookshelf is a little bit bare. And that's because I have 22 books on my physical to-be-read pile. Let's go through them, shall we? I pulled all the books off my physical TBR list off the shelf, and I'm not allowed to buy any books until I finish all of them. And that's a challenge because I work in a bloody bookstore. I'll be tempted all day and every day with new titles and new discoveries and new things that pique my interest. But I am on a book buying ban, which means I've got 22 bad boys to keep me company. The trouble for me with books is that I'm a mood reader, and I often find myself darting in directions of curiosities and interest and new shiny things, and I forget the books that I have on the shelf. I've got a wide variety of books on this 22 book physical TBR list, but let's jump into them, shall we? First on this list is The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. I've decided that I can't have this sitting on my list anymore and be willing to talk about the Lord of the Rings trilogy without having read this book here. The story is about the rebellion against the god and the history of Middle-earth. Someone made a comment on this channel a few months back saying that this was a very fresh copy and that if I'm going to talk about the Lord of the Rings, I need to have read it. It was sitting in the top corner of the shelf, completely uncracked, completely unread, and I intend to change that pretty soon. And recently I was flicking through a graphic novel of the J.R.R. Tolkien and the C.S. Lewis relationship history, and it got me really excited to read this because this is kind of what he wrote just post World War I and his dismissal after getting incredibly sick and having to be hospitalized and recover from that war. And all that to say that it's been on my list for a very long time and I would like to get to it very soon. All right, next up, In a Sunburned Country by Bill Bryson. I have actually never read a Bill Bryson book. I hear that he's funny. I hear that he does history incredibly well in a very engaging manner. But this one intrigued me because obviously I am from Australia and reading about Australian history from an outsider's point of view is always really fascinating to me. And this has just been on the list forever and it keeps popping up. And the amount of secondhand copies I've found here in Canada in secondhand bookstores is pretty ridiculous. It's almost the same amount of kangaroos that we have in Australia. And that intrigues me. So yeah, Bill Bryson. This next one fills me with both excitement and trepidation because of what I have heard over the years, but also what people have spoken about this book. And there is a camp of people that love and adore and think that this is one of the greatest pieces of literature to ever exist. And there is another camp that thinks it is a waste of time and perhaps you shouldn't read it. I'm of course talking about Moby Dick. I haven't ever been tempted to read Moby Dick. I always felt like it was one of those books that I would get around to at some phase of my life, at some period. But I've also heard that it's a bit of a slog, and even from people that love it, I hear it's a slog. And it sits just under 600 pages, which is a long book. But I'm ready. I think I'm ready. I've been umming and ahhing on whether I should include this in the list, but I got myself a free copy and I figured that it was time. One of my closest friends here talks about Moby Dick being his favorite book of all time and how if you want to understand literature and if you want to dive into a meaty, juicy, mind-boggling classic, this is the one to read. But I think Moby Dick is his most read book of all time. He is an English major, which is important because I don't tend to read classics and it's pretty rare for me to dive into something of this length and of this sort of magnitude. But I find it interesting because Moby Dick only sold 1,200 copies as Herman Melville was alive and has since gone on to become a runaway success in the time since he has passed away. I've heard it's introspective, I've heard it's reflective, I've heard that it is deep and detailed and rich and fascinating. Anyway, I figured that if I'm going to read Moby Dick at any point in time, while I live on Vancouver Island, where we get quite a lot of orca whales and different species of whale traveling through, this is a pretty good time to spark that curiosity. Anyway, that's Moby Dick. Cup of Gold by John Steinbeck. I had planned to read this earlier in the year and just got distracted with other things. However, I am currently reading East of Eden, which is one of his final novels of all time, and it is the end of his writing career. And I'm really interested to read this because I would be curious to know what the start of his writing career was. This is the first novel that he ever wrote. It dates back to the early 50s, I believe. Hold on, let me check. Scrap that. It was first published in 1929. And the difference from when he wrote his first novel to East of Eden is upwards of 20 years. And I'm just fascinated to see how he improved, how he changed, how he became the writer that people remember him for. Also, I'm like 200 pages into East of Eden, and it is sensational, hands down. I can put it as 5 stars and I haven't even finished it yet, which is saying a lot. Anyway, that's A Cup of Gold by John Steinbeck. Next up is Chuck Kolsterman, Eating the Dinosaur. Firstly, great cover. Secondly, fantastic title. And thirdly, I've read Chuck Kolsterman a couple of different times over the years, and he is one of the quirkiest, weirdest, strangest writers I've ever come across. The way that he has introspection in different places and reflection, and the way that he writes is just, I've never come across anyone like Chuck Kolsterman, and the way that he fleshes out ideas and kind of goes into the weird and the strange and the wonderful is exactly what I feel like he would have been like when he was 8 years old and no one had edited him yet and no one had judged him and peer pressure hadn't existed yet. And over the years, I wonder if that changed, but he has gone back into that version of himself and really allowed himself to be who he was as a child. At least that's how he reads anyway. And I love his work. Here's the back blurb for you here. Question: what is this book about? Answer: well, that's difficult to say. I haven't read it yet. I've just picked it up and casually glanced at the back cover. There clearly isn't a plot. I think there are several pages about Rear Window and college football and Mad Men. Supposedly there's a chapter outlining all the things the Unabomber was right about, but perhaps I'm misinformed. Weird, wonderful, fascinating. I'm excited to read this. It's been on my shelf for 3 years. Next up is How to Tell a Story. This is from various storytellers and various artists and various creators telling stories about their art and how to structure a story, to write a story. It has in-depth kind of analysis. It's got different sort of images. It's got different sort of ways to tell stories. And that I found was fascinating and thought it would be interesting for craft. I was actually meant to read this 2 months ago and haven't read it. So it is now on my TBR list as well. How to Build a Boat by Elaine Feeney. I actually know very little about this book. It was Booker longlisted in 2023, which usually means it's a big deal. But this book was purchased from me a year and a half ago by my partner for my birthday, and I just never got around to reading it. And I should probably change that. But let me find out what it's about first. It's a book that apparently makes you feel less lonely and really focuses on community and healing and connection. And I'm actually a little bit more intrigued after reading a few sort of comments about it. All that to say, it's been looking at me on a bookshelf for a year and a half, and I felt guilty because my partner bought it for me and she liked it and she tried it out and she read it, and that means the world. And I try to read everything that people that I love gift me because it means something that they gave it to me. And this has just kind of slipped my radar, but it is now on my to be read list as well. This list is long. Always Home, Always Homesick by Hannah Kent. Hannah Kent is brilliant, and this is a love letter to her time in Iceland. When she was 17, she went away to Iceland as an exchange student, and then she spent a long period of her life in Iceland, studying, living, and being, while also falling in love with that time. Really don't know enough about it, other than I know that the cover is stunning. I know that Hannah is a fantastic writer. My mum just brought me this over from Australia, so I'm really looking forward to digging in and just living with it, because as someone who has lived overseas for some time now and is in love with the place that they're at and loves their life over here and loves the world they've created and the people that they're around, I am always homesick for Australia, which is ironic because I spent my whole life being away sick. All I wanted to do was go away, and I finally got away, and I have this push and pull of the guilt of being away and being homesick. Always Home and Always Homesick is a love letter to the land that has formed storytellers and creativities and mystery and a culture of people, and she invites us along to do it with her, and that's pretty beautiful. Anyway, Always Home, Always Homesick, Hannah Kent. Next up is King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Hirschchild. This is the biggest scandal in the Congo history. It follows the story of King Leopold II of Belgium and his killing of 10 million people in the Congo area for lust, greed, wealth, and ambition. I have tried starting it a few different times, and I have started it, but I'm finding the content really hard to swallow. It's both brilliantly written, but also gut-wrenching. I'm about 35 pages in, and I'm only just at the very beginning of this story, and it's got a lot of ghosts, and I'll leave it at that because I haven't read the rest of it, but I will review it properly at one point, and I won't talk about it too much more because I've already spoken about it before in a previous video, but yeah, pretty haunting, I believe. Up is Deep Water by James Bradbury. This goes over the history of our oceans. It goes back to slavery times. It goes back into forming how our oceans have become. It is brilliantly written. It is clever. It is wise. And I have learned so much already. I'm about halfway through, but for whatever reason, I got distracted and put it down. I need to get back to it because it is absolutely sensational. It's this beautiful blend of history and nature writing and environmental and science, and it's all merged into this one story that just gives us this rich undertaking and this rich telling of how it all works within society and how our oceans have become what our oceans have become, but how they got to that place. And I'm just like in awe of how beautiful it is. Plus, it has one of the prettiest covers I've come across in a long while, which is what caught my attention to begin with. But it feels like it is transporting me into a world of the unknown. And yeah, man, it's so good. Whew. All right, I better speed it up because I got a few more. Next up is Lines of the Horizon, Australian surf writing. It's an anthology that celebrates the diversity of the culture within Australian surfing. Tim Winton says of this one that surfing is not subculture, it is culture. And this story here and this book here is the proof. And that was all I needed to buy this. The passion, the pain, the suffering, the bliss, the joy that is given to us surfers through this thing and this vessel that we can do in Mother Nature. I bought this one because it has a story from Mark Smith, who is one of my writing friends, and I wanted to show my support and finally get around to reading it. So that's why that's on the list. Anyway, Lines of the Horizon. Next up is Defiance by Bob Brown. For half a century, Bob Brown has been standing up to those people that have been taking advantage of our planet for wealth, for profit, for ambition. This is his message to young people in order to be able to do the same thing themselves. This is what he's learnt along the way. This is what he understands. This is the way forward and how we can incorporate it into our own lives and stand up against those people that are destroying our planet. Geraldine Brooks had this to say on Defiance. This book is a powerful reminder that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. only if the brave people make an effort to bend it. Bob Brown, Defiance. It's been on my list forever. I have started it, but I do need to read more and finish this one here. Anyway, that's Bob Brown. The Ancients by Andrew Darby. This is a story about ancient trees and the longest living trees in the wildest regions of Tasmania. Those trees are the same trees that their ancestors lived amongst the dinosaurs. And Andrew Darby shares the story of those beautiful, magnificent trees. This is nature writing at its finest as Darby takes us to introduce us to these wild, beautiful trees. And I just am looking forward to digging in to those trees, because who doesn't like trees, man? Trees, I can't believe how much I love trees. The Art of Breaking the Ice by Rachel Mead. This is a historical fiction novel, and in 1960, the legendary icebreaker Magadan set sail for the Antarctic, and there is a secret hidden on board. Nell Law, wife of expedition leader Phil Law. She went and made history, becoming the first Australian woman to set foot on Antarctica. But it wasn't that made her. It was her art that she created. And that changed everything. I picked this up randomly in a bookstore. It was spined in and I just came across it. And I asked the bookseller and he said that it was beautiful. And that was all I needed to be sold on. That was 2 years ago. It's been on my shelf. I need to get reading it. I've heard the landscape description is stunning. I've heard the story is stunning. And I don't know why it's taking me so long. All right, this pile is definitely getting smaller. A Far-Flung Life by R.L. Stedman. I don't know a tremendous amount about it. It was given to me as an advanced reader copy at work because I'm Australian and this story is set in Western Australia in the 1960s, I believe. And I had tried to read it. I read a couple of pages and went, nah, not for me. But then my partner read it and she said it was stunning and she was bawling her eyes out as she was reading this book. And so I put it back on my TBR list. That's all I know. I look forward to reading that one. Margaret Hickey, An Ill Wind. Margaret Hickey wrote an incredible thriller last year that I just simply couldn't put down. So I picked up her newest one here. 300 wind turbines spin all day, every day. And then all of a sudden one stops. And the reason it stops is because there's a body hanging from one of the blades. Margaret Hickey does a fantastic job with her thrillers and with her mysteries and with her storytelling. And all that to say that I love thrillers, I love her pacing, and it is a study of writing more than anything else, but it is also just purely fun, enjoyable, and page-turning reads. A Great Act of Love by Heather Rose. I have read almost everything that Heather Rose has put into the world, and this is her most recent novel. Van Diemen's Land, 1939, and Carolyn is moving to Hobart with a young boy in her care. Carolyn then must navigate the insular colony and the opportunist and carve out a new life for herself and this young boy in Hobart. But Carolyn is carrying a secret of such magnitude. She is moving to the other side of the world to run from it. The premise alone has me hooked, but I will read anything Heather Rose puts out into the world for the rest of time because she's incredible, inspiring, and she is one of my favorite authors. All right, a few more to go here. This pile of books is falling over. Seed by Bree Lee. This is maybe the one I am most excited for on this list. And I have a feeling it might be my favorite book of 2026, even though I haven't read it yet. My mom just brought this over from Australia and I've been patiently waiting, and it will be my next read. The story is a propulsive eco-thriller set in Antarctica. It follows two scientists, Mitchell, who is cynical, and his colleague Francis, and they are tasked to guard a seed vault that is holding global biodiversity seeds. And everything starts to go wrong when the helicopter that's meant to arrive doesn't arrive and doesn't pick them up. I've heard a lot about this book, and I know that Bree went to Antarctica in order to write this book, which I am very envious of, but she's an incredible writer, she's an incredible storyteller, and I'm so excited for this one. it is number 1 on my list. That is Seed by Bree Lee. Let's go. Next up is The Season by Helen Garner. I actually just finished up a Helen Garner book, This House of Grief, but this one went on sale at work and I decided to pick it up. This follows the journalistic instinct of Helen Garner and her reporting on adolescence in Australia. Helen follows the Australian footy season, or the AFL, or the Australian Football League throughout the course of a season and reports and picks up details and shares her findings on that season. The season is a dispatch on boyhood, but it is the pangs of aging and the development of adolescence. And as an Australian, I felt like I needed to pick this one up just to understand. Gunpowder Creek by Alex Duke. This is a debut thriller novel, and I picked it up because it's important to me to support debut authors, and this one caught my eye in the bookstore. This story follows a woman named Emily Barnes who knocks off work at 1:30 p.m. on a Friday, and at 4 p.m. she receives a panicked voicemail from her son, Zach. That voicemail is punctured by a gunshot, and by 4 p.m. she is in a stolen car following the instructions of his kidnappers. Deliver a car to Gunpowder Creek, a ghost town 900 kilometers into the wild of Western Australia. Miss the deadline and Zach dies. And don't open the boot. It's been described as a propulsive, edge-of-your-seat thriller. These are truthfully my favorite kind of thrillers, and I can't wait to get stuck right in. All right, second last is The Turning by Tim Winton. This is a collection of short stories by one of Australia's greatest writers. Fun fact, the publisher Allen and Unwin first discovered Tim Winton, but they had a firm rule that they wouldn't publish short stories, which is when Tim Winton went across to a different publisher. He went across to McPhee Gribble, who eventually was swallowed by Penguin Random House, which is why he now writes for Penguin Random House. This is set in small town Western Australia. It follows some of his regrets, some of the things that he would change. He is a twice winning Booker Prize author, and this collection of short stories comes 20 years after his first collection of short stories. And I found it in a secondhand bookstore and figured that I needed to give it a read. Anyway, that's Tim Winton, The Turning short story collection. I'm so ready for this one, man. Tim Winton. And the final book on my long physical to be read pile, drum roll please, is The First Person by Richard Flanagan. Richard Flanagan is one of my favorite authors of all time. And I'll never quite get over how sensational Richard Flanagan is with a pen. I don't quite comprehend how he does what he does, but the way that it makes you feel is, it feels like your heart just has like these tiny little tremors the whole time as you're reading the words on the page, and they transport you into a different world and a different place. And that's a pretty rare thing for a writer to be able to do. All right, those are the 22 books on my physical to be read pile. Let me know in the comments below if you would like me to keep you updated on this little series, and I'll see you in the next one. Let me know below what you are reading, and try not to add any books to my list because my list is already too grand. Also, shout out Benny for the skateboard. See you in the next one.